Wait, what is Squaresoft doing on here? Wait, what's King's Knight? Why have I never heard of this game? That's probably what you're thinking, right? You never heard of it because it sucks ass. This piece of ass cheese was Squaresoft's first ever domestic US release. And it's buried for obvious reasons. Square will never re-release this piece of shit.
Yeah, unfortunately for Armake or Marco or whatever the hell he calls himself these days, King's Knight was re-released for the original Wii Virtual Console in 2007-2008, depending on where you live. And through some lapse of better judgment, I spent the 500 Wii points to download this game, and I will tell you right now, King's Knight, Square's first localized NES release, though actually their second Famicom title overall, is never going to be regarded as one of the Squaresoft greats. I mean, even when you figure out what you're supposed to do and how you're supposed to proceed, the game is pretty much a chore to play through. Now, there are those who actually like this game and think it's a pretty decent one overall, and that's perfectly fine, I'm cool with that. However, my own experience with King's Knight is far from a positive one, and I'm afraid I cannot in good conscience consider myself part of that camp. King's Knight is a hybrid adventure/shooter game where you have to guide 4 heroes through individual journeys before they team up to face the demon known as Evil Dragon. The idea is that you have to guide your heroes through each of their individual stages while collecting items and power-ups that will strengthen them for the final battle. Once you get to the final stage, the assembled heroes will be joined together to make the final trek to slay the dragon, or at best, become a larger target for ambushes. It's an interesting premise actually, and I could sort of appreciate what they were trying to go for here. I just don't think it was executed properly. Each of your 4 characters, Rajak the Knight, Kaliva the Wizard, Barusa the Monster, and Toby the Kid Thief, has their unique stage for you to traverse in, but they also have their own attributes. Some are faster than others, some fire stronger shots. All of these characters have one thing in common: they all die rather quickly, only needing a couple of hits before meeting their untimely demise. There are health pickups to heal your wounds, but they only restore a fraction of health and they're fairly uncommon. Contrast to the fairly more common unhealth pickups, which will hurt you, sort of like poison mushrooms but even more bland. Here's the deal. Control's kinda crap. When you're in the water, your character ends up slipping a lot more and it's more difficult to control, which makes it harder to effectively dodge enemies and projectiles. You'd figure moving around in water would make your character a lot more sluggish and slower to react. But in the world of King's Knight, every body of water has a sheet of ice on the bottom and you end up slipping and sliding all over the place with little control over your momentum. I guess they wanted to make up for the fact that when you're on land, your character moves about sluggishly and is slow to react. There are speed pickups that you could come across, but you need to collect a bunch of these to get any semblance of notable speed increase. Power-ups are hidden in the scenery you destroy, but you'd be hard-pressed to figure out what any of them do. The easiest ones to decipher are the arrows, which either add or subtract health from your meter. The rest of it, well, some increase your power, others make you jump. Unless you had access to the manual or help guide, these symbols mean nothing. But you need to pick up these symbols because they give you experience, which builds your levels, and some of these symbols happen to be spells that will be required to conquer the final level. A level that can be accessed with any number of surviving heroes, but can only be conquered with all 4 intact. The spells can be uncovered in the dungeon levels, which are even more hideous. Lots of hazards inhabit this area, and the boss at the end, and yeah. King's Knight was released in 1989, right? How many more years do I have to wait before Final Fantasy becomes a thing? More to the point, how many more years do I have to wait before Final Fantasy becomes a thing on the Super Nintendo when it really started to get good? Wait, this isn't 1989 anymore. It's 2015. We've already had a bunch of, So how many years do I have to wait before we get a King's Knight remake? I think we're long overdue. If only I was kidding. In terms of visual presentation, King's Knight has an interesting visual style that is almost akin to a traditional role-playing game on the NES, what with the little heroes roaming around and the mostly tile-based settings of the various stages themselves. Seriously, these graphics could have been compiled for some RPG and it would have been fine. Not the best quality graphics you'll find on the NES, but suitable for the role-playing genre. It certainly would have led to some unintentional misleading for some who see a couple screenshots thinking it's an early Square RPG, and once they begin to play and realize it's not an RPG but rather a shoot 'em up, yeah, this is where King's Knight begins to falter. As an RPG, it would have looked fine. As a shooter, it looks rather awkward and strange. That's not a bad thing, mind you, it looks different for the time, I just don't think it works that well. There will be instances where bullets will blend in almost seamlessly with the scenery, making the game even more frustrating than it should be. It just looks odd and adds to the already obscene difficulty of King's Knight, which will not hesitate in throwing as much crap on you as humanly possible. Sure, you could memorize the patterns, memorize the hidden traps and pitfalls, as well as the portals to the underworld where you could stock up on magic spells required to overcome the challenges of the final level, but the game offers little to no incentive to push you onwards. Square games, Squaresoft, Square Enix, whatever you want to call them, are often known for their delightfully composed music. I mean, regardless of what you think of the games themselves, you have to admit they often produce memorable music. Unfortunately, King's Knight is an exception to that rule, boasting only a handful of extremely repetitive tracks that are dull and uninspired. I mean, that overworld tune is kinda... terrible. The sound effects are your generic NES sound effects that sometimes sound like what they're supposed to, but the sound that plays whenever you take a hit is a bit out of place and it's a bit annoying. I guess, I don't know, this whole game just rubs me the wrong way. When all is said and done, King's Knight is simply a flawed game. Anyone who jumps into this without any knowledge of what to do will get frustrated by the many pitfalls of the gameplay. And even with that information on hand, the game is still pretty frustrating to play and ultimately isn't a whole lot of fun in the long run either. Like I said, there are some folks who think this is a pretty decent game and that's fine. I'm just not one of those folks, unfortunately, and whatever positives could be found here is simply outweighed by the multitude of negative aspects that just turned me off. King's Knight is an interesting curiosity piece for Square fans who want to see some of the company's early pre-Final Fantasy works, but for those looking for a good fantasy shooter type thing to play, this may not be your cup of tea. I generally go for Dragon Spirit, it's a much more enjoyable game.
And he does. Bye bye, Toby. Squaresoft said you have to die!